Okay, welcome to the CSS for Dummies session number 13. In this session, we're going to talk about margins. Margins are one of the important properties in CSS that allows us to be control how far the component is from its borders. Okay, so let me show you what I exactly mean. If you come here, margins basically allows to create space around element. This is my element. Margins controls that how much space there should be before the element starts. By default, every element starts almost around the edge of the screen. If this is my edge of the screen, okay, the margins basically define that how far apart this component needs to be. This is what we say. It allows us to control the placement of components within our HTML. So that's why it's very important. So it gives a space basically. That's what margins means. The margin that means the space before the component starts. That's the point here. So if this is my border area, margin specifies how much space there should. How do we specify margin? Well, there are various different formats of margin. First being that, for example, if this is paragraph, I would use margin top. The margin top basically means that the space from the top. So how far from the top this element should be from its limit. By default, it would appear next line. But if you use the margin top feature, this basically means that now use this in 100 pixels of it. So 100 pixels apart this component, 100 pixels this component. So you already can see that we controlling exactly where this margin bottom basically means that after this component there would be 100 gap. Margin right basically means that this is the right area. So 150 pixels gap has there a space has been added here. So the component starts after 150 pixels. And similarly, margin left would basically be the space from it. This is basically what margins means. You use margin top if you only want to control the space from the top. You want to control the space from the right only, so we use right. If you want the space control from the left, we specify. Okay. Then there is a shorthand property as well. Remember, in CSS, almost every major property has shorthand property. Shorthand means that you can specify all these four coordinates in just one line. Instead of writing four lines, you just write one line as a margin. So you specify margin and you give 25 pixels, 50 pixels, 75 pixels, and 100 pixels. So this typically would mean that it will start from top, left, bottom, and then you can use that as well. It will control that. Similarly, you can also have only two properties. So if you specify two values, you can use that. So two means that which angles you want to control. The auto value, for example, can set the margin properties auto to horizontally center the element within its container. If this is inside a container, sub-container, so it will automatically horizontally center the element. You set it to. Okay, so sometimes we just set it to auto that use the margin alignments of the parent with a center horizontal element. So this is one way of understanding how margins work. You can though specify only a single value of margin. You specify margin itself is 25. This basically means that now you want all four corners to have 25 pixels. This would mean that I want from top, I want from right, I want from left, and I want bottom. All will be basically is equals to. So it will have a 25 pixel gap from all. Typically, we also use this. This is again same as using margin, margin, margin. But if you use margin top, bottom, right, you are explicitly specifying which direction you want to go into. But if you specify margin 25, it means space around all four. Okay, so for example, if I have div and I gave it a border, we discussed class, then I specify 25 pixels. So now it means that it has 25 pixels from here, it has 25 pixels from its left, 25 pixels space from its bottom, and 25 pixels. All these four axes are created using this margin. Okay. So all margin properties basically can have the following property. And set it auto, and we talked about auto. Now that auto value, it basically uses the auto to horizontally center the element within its container. So this is important. So that means that if you have a container, meaning there is a first div, and inside this div, it will use this auto. So this is my container, and then this is the div I'm working with. This will be basically what we call auto. Do keep in mind. So we need to have a container. If it is just a standalone like this one, so you won't see the effect of auto. Then it basically specify the length. The length is specified in terms of pixels, which we have specified here, 25 pixels. So it will count 25 pixels of this and area. You can give it in terms of points. You can give it in terms of centimeters and some as well as in percentage. So you sometimes specify that you want 10% of a gap, so it will have 10% of your entire screen's gap. Okay. You can also use inherit property. Inherit property will basically specify that a margin should be separate it from its parent element. So again, the margin property is that if you have a main container and inside that main container you want to create another. Now this becomes my parent, okay? And now this is the container. So whatever is the margin set for this guy, whatever is the margin of this parent, this inner child will also automatically inherit the same thing. Okay, so if you use the inherit feature, do keep this thing in mind. Okay, so now this is basically what margin does. Let's explore a few examples to understand this much more.
Okay, so in our VS Code, I've created a simple HTML document. Again, doc type HTML head CSS margin, and then basically what we have done is written a simple tag called div tag here, and this element is a margin of 70 pixels, and then we have created a style. Okay, so this becomes style, and we have given a CSS style to this particular div. Okay, simple code. So what this does is that this is our div. Within internal CSS, we have given a div style. Then we have set the margin property. Now this is where the magic happens. If you specify just the margin, this basically means that you are specifying margin from the top, left, right, bottom, all equal to 70 pixels. Okay, and obviously you have given border with a particular color to make it look up here. If I execute this code, and I should be able to see this. So here it is. This is basically what it means. And let me just put this thing aside and make this close. Okay, so now we can see the result. So basically this basically means that now the margin is set to 70%. So for example, if I just comment this margin, this is what basically default means. Now margin again means that the space from this border of your screen. So this is the web page. The web page starts from the right at the corner. So when we set the margin, basically we are telling it where the component should start, from at what position the component should start. Okay, so as compared to the browser's edge. So when we specify the margin here, it basically means that we want to use this margin. So in this case, for example, if I just comment this again on I can use margin left. Okay, and I want to set, for example, 100 px. This basically means that now I want from the left side 100 pixels of a gap. Okay, so this becomes my left hand, and from left hand you see this 100 pixels gap. Similarly, if I use, for example, margin top as well, and I can set 100 px, so this way it would mean that from I have a 200 pixel gap. Same goes for every single text. If I want to use the same margin for a heading, I would come here and I would say, okay, h2, bracket block start, block close. Okay, so I have an h2 here, and I want to specify the margin for this guy as well. So I can say margin 0 px. What 0 means that it will use this as an absolute 0, so there is no space before it. Sometimes we do that even. In fact, in sometimes what we do is as a first tag of rule, we use body, and we specify the margin of the body as margin, and then we say 0 pixels. Okay, so what this basically means that now you see that the entire body starts from absolute 0. So this would ensure that next time when we use the margins, we can calculate in a better way or how our web page is or web content are basically aligned. So setting a body margin to 0 means that your everything becomes 0. Now if you note here, the content starts from absolutely touching the border area of your web page. Okay, so if I don't use it, so for example, if I let me comment it, Control S, see this, there's already a gap. But if I undo this, Control S, so it just moves a little bit back. This is again a standard practice in many of the websites that you found that they set the margin of your body 0. Then they control the margin of each of the components here. So I can use, for example, just a 20 pixels, Control S. So it means that from the next component, there's a 20 pixel gap of this division on top, and then there's a left margin here. So maybe I can set this left margin to just, for example, 30 pixels. So now it becomes 30. This is basically what we do. And then h2, I can say, okay, h2, I want 20 pixels. I know that now because the margin of this body is 0, so this is exactly a 20 pixel gap. And then now it just goes up to you. When you use just the margin, do remember that means the left, right, top, bottom. So again, if I set 300, for example, Control Z, so it's like 300 from the top, 300 from the left, 300 from the 300 at the bottom. So after this then the div will start. So this CSS will have a 300 pixel space margin all around it, depending on basically what you exactly want to do. Control S, now this would mean 30. So CSS will have 30 pixels from the left, 30 from the top, 30 with the right, and 30 at the bottom. After that, we have this div tag that will start. Okay, so this is what margin does. So it controls the space before a component starts. Okay, so We set the component and we use this margin property to control how our components are basically behaving and where you want them to start and where you don't want them to start. Okay, you can though use a property. For example, if I come here and let me write another paragraph tag, for example, say para, this is my margin code example for CSS course. So I use this paragraph here. So now you see this, it starts because we have set the body to 0. So body margin has been set to 0. This starts exactly where the screen starts, or your web browser would start, in other words. So sometimes it's okay, depending on what exactly you want to do, but because I don't want to set a background and I don't want to, this is supposed to be text, so I have this margin property. Yeah. Now, how do I set a style with it? Another way of doing it is that we set a paragraph and we can say, here's a paragraph, and then I can use a margin. So I can say margin, but then this time just specifying the value, I can say from left, I want it to start from, for example, 30 pixels. Then from the right, I want it to be, for example, having 20 pixel gap. From top, I want it to have a 40 pixel gap, and from bottom also, I want to have a 40 pixel gap. What this basically means that I want to specify the specific axis of specify the units all in one line, and then I started just PSPXPX, make sure you give units. Now this means again left, right, top, bottom, all 4 values have been provided here. This is what we call a simple shorthand property, where all proper values are given in a single line. You can set it as a separate margin top, left, bottom. You can set it as a single value. Margin 30 means all 4 corners will have exactly the same thing, or you can specify them individually as well. Simply margin basically means that how much space you want. So you can give it, for example, 90, control S. So you now see this top is basically 90 pixels. Or for example, we say this can be 100, and then it has a 200 pixels on the right side. Okay, then with this can be, for example, I said, okay, let's have it 20, and then this can have 140, and then this now has 140 from the bottom, and so on and so forth. You can basically control the spacing of each component, how it behaves within your web page. So as we start to work with more complex and start to design web pages, margins are something that's very important and very essential that we use. Okay, so I hope this clarifies things. So next we will try to discuss padding, which again is the space, controlling the space, but this time after the margin inside a selected component. So let me talk about margin padding first, then we will go and see what we understand in terms of what's the box model of CSS is. Okay.